Gervais Mendo say, history is an object lesson that power and politics really does not care for individuals. What that man did for that regime, what he did to promote and help that regime stay in power. But you see, the problem is that we have a leadership in Cameroon that does not listen. If you do not listen, then you cannot have a dialogue with the other person.
So can you start by introducing yourself? Tell us who you are.
Okay. My name is Lyombe Eko. I was born in Biya, in a place which you call Bakuri Town in Great Support. I am a native boy who grew up near the Baptist Mission. I went to the primary school in Great Support, the CBC school. And from there, my parents were not very well to do, so they could not afford to send me to Sase. So I ended up in a Bible college in Endowed in the Northwest province. So I grew up, so to speak, for part of my life up in the Northwest. So I know the Northwest very well. I have very many friends there. But ultimately I came down back to Biya. I went to bilingual grammar school for my lower sixth and upper sixth. So I had my A-levels as a student in bilingual grammar school. And then I was sponsored to come to university in America by, strange enough, I had met a couple, a Canadian couple, up in Ndu. They were refugees from East Germany, and they had immigrated to Canada, and they had done very well. They had a construction company, they had done very well. So they were supporting missions in Cameroon. So they were supporting the Cameroon Baptist Convention. They were funding the Banso Baptist Hospital, and they were funding other projects. So the missionaries brought them to the Bible college where I was in Ndu, and the missionary at the time, his name was William Muller. He was a Canadian. He said, there's this young man we want you to meet, this young student. He speaks your language, he speaks German. So it just so happens that when I was growing up in Great Support in Biya, my grandfather, who had gone to German school, could speak German, and he taught me German when I was young, together with my cousins. And so I knew some German poems. That's the first language I can say I knew better than English. And so I had that German, I could recite those German poems that my grandfather had taught me. So when this Canadian couple who came from Germany met me up in Ndu, the missionary said, you should meet this little boy, this boy who knows some your language, German. So I was invited to meet with this couple, and the missionary said, can you recite them one of the German poems? So I did recite them a German poem, Sein Knapp, ein Röslein stehen, Röslein auf der Heiden, by Johann von Goethe. And I knew others. And they were just shocked to see that there was this African boy up there in Ndu in the Northwest who knew some German. And so that was the end of it. We forgot it. I went back down to the Southwest. I went to bilingual grammar school. And when I finished my A-levels, by the way, I was one of the few students who took O-level German. At that time, we were doing GCE in London, and they were offering German and Spanish and other languages. I just registered, as I was registering for all the courses, I registered German. And there were only two of us in the room taking that exam. Me and the daughter of the British Consul in Biya. At that time, the British Consul had an office in Biya, and there were some British people there, and the daughter was studying German. Two of us were in that exam room. And it just so happened that I passed German so I had German and English and French among my other O-level subjects. So it enabled me to go to bilingual grammar school. So anyway, when I finished bilingual grammar school, I was planning to go to the University of Yaoundé. That was the only option for us. And I just received a message from the Cameroon Baptist Convention. The missionary, she was at the Baptist High School in Great Support in Biya at that time. And he says, there's a couple who's been looking for you. And I said, who is it? They said, there's a Canadian couple who's been looking for you. They said they met you a few years ago in the Northwest Province, and they were wondering what has become of you. And they said, if you're interested in coming to university in America, they are willing to pay for your expenses. I was shocked. So before I knew it, one thing led to another. They went to the university in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. They paid the tuition for me. They paid for my air ticket. And all I had to do was get a passport, go to the American consul in Douala, get a visa, and before I knew it, I was in America. When my parents, again, I told them my parents were not well to do. I wanted to go to Sase, but they couldn't afford to send me to Sase. So they said, oh, that's too expensive. That's not for us. It's for the high class. So then when the television started in Yaoundé, I moved on to Yaoundé. I read the first news bulletin on CTV in Bamenda, 1985, during the conference, during the party conference. We changed from CNU to CPDM. We were the pioneers. We started the CRTV in Bamenda in 1985. But to be truthful to you, the management, the way the corporation was run, was completely contrary to the way I had been trained as a journalist. The first thing that happened, when I went to Yaoundé, my last name is Eko, E-K-O. They saw my last name. The secretary in the office misspelled my name. She says E-K-O apostrophe O. That means I am one of the tribes, almost like Eto. So they assumed that I was one of them. I met Gervais Mendo. You know what he said? He said, c'est un frère qui est parti là-bas. So they started calling me to their meetings, but they spoke their language in their meetings. And they thought I was one of them. I told them that, because I had gone to bilingual grammar school, my French was decent. But, I'm from Biya. I was born in Biya. That's where my parents is.
So that simply tells us how recruitment was done at CRTV.
And promotion at that time. So I didn't know about the promotion thing, but I came to know about the favoritism. Because if you sang the praises of Paul Biya, Gervais Mendo will give you an envelope with money in it. If you did not, he comes to the newsroom. If you did not say enough about what Paul Biya did, you don't get anything. And he told you so. And I was shocked that, we were expected to do that. And for the other people, it was normal. So after 1 year and a few months, I told Professor Mendo, I have to leave. I cannot continue like this. Then I had to go to Professor Mendo. His office was at the presidency. He had a sumptuous office. He had power. So I went into the presidency. I requested a meeting with Professor Mendo for him to sign my mise en détachement. That's what, the minister signed a mise en détachement for me to go to Nairobi for 2 years on detachment. Mendoza refused to sign it. He said, mais c'est quoi ça? J'ai prévu un poste pour toi. Et tu m'abandonnes ici comme ça. I said, I'm sorry, Monsieur le Président. We call him Monsieur le Président because he was the Président de la cellule de coordination de la télévision nationale. That's what they called it at the time. Before CRTV became CRTV, we had a cellule de coordination de la télévision nationale at the presidency. And Gervais Mendoza was the president of that commission, where they had people from all parts of the government, because it's a security thing. And so I persuaded Professor Mendoza. I said, I'll be back in 2 years. And he signed reluctantly, and a little bit he was upset that I was leaving. When he said he had a post for me, he was convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that I was Betty Boodoo because of my name. And so then I realized that is how promotion, I could not continue playing that deceit. I realized that it was a tribal, there was a tribal mentality, and people had got advanced because of their tribal membership. And I was not going to live a lie, as some others had done, so I decided to leave. So I went to Nairobi, Kenya, and I was in Kenya for 9 years. And then from there, I worked for the Union of National Radio and Television Organizations of Africa. There was a union in which all the national radio and TV organizations worked. We had a program exchange center in Nairobi, and my job was to translate programs from French to English, and I produced some documentaries. So it enabled me, that job, to travel around Africa. I've been to virtually all African countries, with a few exceptions. I've been to all of them. So I know Africa very well. And I know problems of freedom of speech and expression. I know the problems of freedom of speech and expression in Cameroon. Some of my colleagues were locked up. Some of them died. I know people like Ebsingum, who is no longer with us, and others. Even before the ones you mentioned, before Samuel Wazizi, the current group, there are others who had been imprisoned before.
So earlier you talked about Gervais Mendoza, who is now of blessed memory.
Right.
We know his ordeal before his demise. What do you think, or what are your thoughts? How do you feel about how he was treated in his last days on earth?
It shows Mendoza was a pillar of the Biya regime. He was an ideological, intellectual, one of the intellectual pillars, and he made sure of that intellectual purity towards the Biya regime in the newsroom, like I just told you. But it's a regime that does not care about individual people. Mendoza literally propped up Paul Biya, but the problem is there was infighting among them. There are different factions in that ethnic group. So he lost out. Mendoza's management was not orthodox, in the sense that Mendoza, if he had a palace for a house. A civil servant, where does a civil servant get money to build such a sumptuous palace which has a chapel inside of it, his compound? And Mendoza he had so much disposable money that people lined up. He was a kind-hearted man. People lined up in front of his house, and he would give them 1,000 francs every morning before he goes to work. He never saw beggars, and he turned his back on them. But the only problem is that whose money was he using? You don't use the state money, the money for CRT TV, to promote your personal charity. That was his problem. And then he used, in my view, his management was not, like I said, he distributed money left, right, and center in the newsroom. And so Mendoza's downfall came about because there was a clash inside of their group, the ethnic group, and he lost out. Somebody got the ear of Paul Biya, and they must have said something that Mendoza is out to undermine you or something, whereas Mendoza had been the booster of the Biya regime. So he died a miserable death. And the lesson for us, for me...
Let me just pick up Portuguese.
Gervais Mendoza, his story is an object lesson that power and politics really does not care for individuals. What that man did for that regime, what he did to promote and help that regime stay in power the last 40, he was one of those who helped it. But again, he was undercut by some other people who thought that he was having all the advantages and all the money and all that. And again, it was It was a clash between them, and then he was undercut, and he ended up in jail.
Okay, you've talked about internal divisions within the ranks of the ruling CPDM. Could that be one of the reasons why having a successor for a post-Biya era is almost impossible?
I would not say that. The first and foremost, President Ahidjo, who knew Paul Biya more than anyone else, who appointed him as the prime minister and later his successor when he handed up over power in 1982, he said that Paul Biya is a very indecisive person. He cannot take decisions very quickly. That's why everything with him has to be slow and methodical and stagnant. And so he does not decide things very quickly. And so let me give an example, the starting of the TV in Bamenda. Professor Gervais Mendo and Professor Ngiamba is again the guy who started this thing before Mendoza took over. He was later moved up to the post office, Camtel or something. Professor Ngiamba Lutsiri, one of their people too. He said that Paul Biya, we are here in Bamenda, Paul Biya will come forward and make a declaration and say, I declare the national television CRTV open. The first time we went on the air, we were waiting and waiting and waiting for a word of whether Paul Biya will in fact come forward and declare the TV open. It never happened until the 5 minutes before we were supposed to go on air. We didn't get a message. So you know how we opened the Cameroon TV for the first time? We put the cover of a record. Somebody had made a record of Paul Biya. His face was on there, music with the flag and so on. That's how we opened the TV. With the national anthem.
So he's a man of uncertainty.
He is indecisive and he's enigmatic. Enigmatic is he's a riddle within he's a hard nut to crack in terms of knowing what is going on in his head. So people, because of that, people do all kinds of things around him because he doesn't react very quickly.
So does that make you worry about the future of Cameroon politics?
Yes, it does. Because nature abhors a vacuum. And we have a number of forces in Cameroon. The Biya, if you read my book, one of my chapters is on the Biya, the battalion, the intervention rapide, which is trained by the Israelis. The Israelis control the security and they control the communications of Cameroon. We don't know what the Biya is going to do. Are they going to go the Sudanese way, where they had a rapid intervention battalion in Sudan, plus the regular army? Now the two of them are fighting. So in Cameroon, we have three forces. We have the Presidential Guard, which they inherited from Ahidjo. They have the Biya, and then we have the regular army. What is going to happen with those three? Who is going to control them when Biya is not there? And Biya will not be there one day. And his son,
which of his sons?
Frank.
Frank, yeah.
Everybody saw Frank as the anointed successor. But it appears that Biya's wife Chantal cannot stand Frank. So they are at loggerheads. I think that's one of the reasons why Frank Biya is not the natural successor, like say in the case of Gabon or Togo and so on. So the succession of Paul Biya in Cameroon is very opaque.
So what, as someone who's followed Cameroonian politics for several decades now, what do you think Cameroon deserves at this point in time?
Change. We need change.